Okay, welcome back to another history lesson. This one's going to be really great. It's going to finish up the Thanksgiving story, and then we are going to move on from there. So here we go. On the last episode of History. Dun, dun, dun. The Pilgrims arrive in the New World, but November was too late to plant crops. Many settlers died of scurvy and malnutrition during that horrible first winter. Of the 102 original Mayflower passengers, only 44 survived. Like some other colonies like Jamestown, the kindness of the local Native Americans saved them from a frosty death. The Pilgrims' remarkable courage was displayed the following spring. When the Mayflower returned to Europe, they could have left America and gone back to where things were safe, but not a single pilgrim deserted Plymouth. This is how strongly they believed in their hopes and dreams, and their dream was to build an ideal Christian commonwealth. So do you get what that means? So in the spring, after that horrible winter where so many people died, they had the opportunity to go back across the ocean on the Mayflower and go back home where it was safe. And how many pilgrims chose to do that? None. No one, not a single one, because they believed so strongly in their dream. Now, Massasoit, chief of the Wampanoag tribe, was willing to be friendly. One of his warriors, Squanto, could speak English. Squanto was the perfect person to help these new colonists. Why? Well, because he spoke English and he had already embraced Christianity. Squanto had grown up in the very village that they found. When Squanto was a little boy, okay, so here's a picture of Squanto, but this is when he was older. So when he was a little boy, a ruthless sea captain kidnapped him and sold him into slavery in Spain. After 4 years, he was freed by kindly monks. Do you know what a monk is? A monk spelled like this, monks. They were people that were part of a church, kind of like priests. Okay, so he was freed by kindly monks, and then he made his way to England and finally sailed across the Atlantic to go back to his village home. But when he got there, all his friends and family had died of disease, probably smallpox. So Squanto joined the Wampanoag tribe, where Massasoit was the chief. So Squanto, I'm going to go back to this picture for a second. Well, actually, no, let me see what's next. Yeah, this one. So Squanto helped Massasoit and the Englishmen make a treaty. Do you know what a treaty is? So a treaty means that you both agree to something. Like, it's kind of like you're playing a game and you call a truce. And a truce means, okay, no more, we're not going to be enemies. We're going to agree to something, and it's going to be you sign this, I sign this, and we both agree. So that's kind of what a treaty is. So in this treaty between Massasoit and the Englishmen, they swore not to hurt each other. Massasoit wanted help to defend himself and his tribe against a nearby and feared Narragansett tribe. I don't know how to say that, but it was a different Indian tribe that they were very afraid of, that was really scary. Okay, in exchange, Massasoit would supplement the food supply of the Pilgrims for the first few years. So do you get what the treaty says? They're saying, okay, you protect us from these other mean Native Americans, and we'll help you with food. Okay, Squanto himself showed the Pilgrims how to grow crops in their new fields. I'm going to go back to Squanto for a second. William Bradford wrote, he showed them how to set the corn in the field and how to tend it when it came up. Also, he told them if they did not put a fish in the ground, so I'm going to point out, see what he's holding in his hand? A fish. if they did not put a fish in the ground with the seed for fertilizer in these long-used fields, it would come to nothing. So that quote was from William Bradford's journal. William Bradford, in his journal, he also called Squanto a special instrument sent of God for their good. So with Squanto's help, they were able to avoid starvation. But the young colony, which the English named Plymouth Plantation, was still a very risky place to live. So one hot day, Governor John Carver, and remember they elected John Carver to be their first governor. He was laboring in the cornfields when his head began to hurt. When he came in, he laid down to rest, and he soon slipped into unconsciousness. Only a few days later, John Carver died. Because remember, they didn't have doctors or hospitals, or they died of who knows what. It sounds like maybe he had like a stroke or a brain aneurysm or something. I don't know. The colonists then elected William Bradford to be their new leader. Okay, so William Bradford is the new governor. Bradford worked hard to make the colony successful. He planted crops, he bought food from English fishing boats that sailed by, and he treated the Native Americans with friendship. By the fall of Bradford's first year as governor, the colony finally was beginning to prosper. Their crops, which were watched over by Squanto, had grown well, and the harvest was plentiful. The Pilgrims built fires, cooked a huge feast of corn, wild turkey, fish, and deer, and invited Massasoit and 90 other Wampanoag Indians to be their guests. So there were 90 of the Native Americans. This is talking now about the first Thanksgiving. Oh, it changed color there. That's funny. Okay, so there were 90 Native Americans, and there were there were 53. At this point, there were 53 surviving Pilgrims from the Mayflower. Remember, only 44 Mayflower Pilgrims. Only 44 ended up surviving out of the 102. Okay, but at this point, there's 53. They invited 90 Native Americans and had a big celebration that lasted like 3 days. Okay, so they played sports at this first Thanksgiving. Their favorite sport was shooting, with both settlers and Indians sharing a strong fascination with guns. At this first Thanksgiving feast, the Pilgrims gave thanks to God for their survival. Soon, other Puritans would come to the New World seeking the freedom to worship God in their own way. So north of Plymouth Plantation, over 2,000 Puritans formed a second Puritan settlement called the Massachusetts Bay Colony. But this was a different group at first. The Massachusetts Bay Colony grew so much faster than the Plymouth settlement that it swallowed up the great-grandchildren of the Pilgrims in 1691. So that means that there was another group, like this group was small and they were special, I think, but they're not the ones that grew and lasted. They were kind of merged together with some of the other groups. And that happened later in 1691. Okay, so I wanted to show you something else because that is the story of Thanksgiving. But I Googled today, so this is a depiction of the story of the first Thanksgiving. But if you Google, like I did, the real story of Thanksgiving, you are going to get this. A lot of false information and fake news, and it's going to be different from what I told you. In fact, when I Googled it, these are some of the headlines that I got. The real Thanksgiving was in 1637 when the Massachusetts colony governor declared a day of Thanksgiving to celebrate colonial soldiers who had just slaughtered 700 Pequot men, women, and children in what is now Mystic, Connecticut. Then there's another headline. It says, The Dark History of Thanksgiving. And the next one said, The Myths of the Thanksgiving Story and the Lasting Damage They Imbue. And the next one said, The Real History of Thanksgiving Isn't the One You Learned in School. And the next one said, The Real History of Thanksgiving Can Be Painful for Many Native Americans. And the next one said, The Real Story of Thanksgiving, Story of a Massacre in 1637. So, this is a very important lesson for you to learn because your friends and other people that are not getting the real story are getting all of this fake news and is being taught to them in schools. And it doesn't say anything about this nice picture and the history, the real history of Squanto and stuff like that. So I'm not saying that it was all nice, but I do want you to know this. If you Google something and things don't make sense because it's all sounds one-sided and it's all anti-Thanksgiving and it's all anti-American, and I didn't even put any anti-stuff in my search. I just said the real story of Thanksgiving. You can be sure of one thing. What you are getting is not news. It's something else called propaganda. Look at this word, propaganda. This is an important word for you to know. Propaganda is not the truth. Propaganda is what somebody else wants you to believe. And right now, there is an attack on America and especially an attack on American history. And bad people are trying to change what we believe about American history. Why would they do this? Because if you don't know where you came from, then you don't know who you are. And they want you to be weak and to just take the free stuff that they promise to give you and not question anything. Well, you should question things. All the stuff I put into this history came from the real history books or from real people's journals like William Bradford. The Thanksgiving story is a story about courage and following your dreams and God-fearing people, which means they were Christian people, and cooperation between cultures. And even though there are other stories in our history that are not always so happy, we need to celebrate the ones that do show our true American values. I put this picture because this is another example of propaganda. And when people and governments start doing this, this should be scary because this was communist propaganda. Okay. The sense of purpose of the original pilgrims. The sense of purpose of the original pilgrims left a permanent imprint on the national character. They maintained unshakable confidence that God protected them. They felt that the way they got there was a miracle and that God helped make that happen and put people like Squanto in place to help them. And they felt like that didn't happen just so that they get special privileges or special things, but they thought they were there to impose special responsibilities. They weren't looking for an easy life. They were not looking for an easy life. They were not looking for free stuff. They worked hard and were courageous and faced death. And you can tell that because a lot of them really did die. They saw themselves as instruments, not authors of a mysterious master plan. The Pilgrims knew that everyone can gain a lot from gratitude. So that is the word here that is important to remember on Thanksgiving. And you can see gratitude is a lot like the word being grateful. And that's what that means, is to be grateful for what you have. Even because these guys had very little, and sometimes all they had was, I guess, their lives, because they didn't have very much stuff around them. So they used their lives to do good if that was all they had. So that's the story that we should celebrate on Thanksgiving, and just be aware that there is real propaganda out there. Okay, guys, so I hope you enjoyed this lesson, and we'll see you next time when we learn a little bit more about American history. See you next time. Bye.